Thanks, Dave. Hex, I have some fond memories of the first Lost Planet game, shooting big giant aliens in their soft weak spots for maximum damage. Those were the days.
Yeah, but the second one went for more of a co-op approach, and personally I thought it was a big pile of grindy rubbish. But maybe it'll be third time's a charm for this series.
Or maybe we'll get a frosty reception.
Because it's an ice planet.
This is a planet ice, everyone.
Very good.
Ice is pretty cold.
Now, before we get too stuck into the review, I had one immediate reaction when I started playing this. This is undeniably a Western game, and I only mention that because Lost Planet has always been really distinctly Japanese, albeit aimed at a Western audience.
Yeah, it certainly has a different feel to it, doesn't it? The first two games were developed in-house at Capcom, but this one is made by Spark Unlimited, who've made such gems as Turning Point Fall of Liberty and Legendary, which actually weren't gems at all.
Yeah, it's not a great track record, is it? But we're not here to judge them on their past, Badge. Speaking of the past, though, Lost Planet 3 is a prequel taking place on EDN 3 years before the first game in the planet's very first colony.
And not only is it a prequel, but it's also told through flashback by part-time bearded Nicolas Cage impersonator Jim. We first meet him as an old man crushed by a rock. So as you do when you're dying under a rock, Jim begins to tell his life story.
You know, back on Earth, my father believed you had to confess your sins.
Flashback to a much younger, brighter bearded Jim who's just had a baby with his wife on Earth. And what better way to support your family than by signing up for a stint of off-world mining on a newly colonized, extremely dangerous planet?
Yes, I thought it felt a bit like Deadliest Catch, but with aliens and mechs. There's all sorts of rough and tumble men with beards, working long shifts with deadly machinery in cold, harsh conditions, all to earn an honest dollar.
Sir, I'm here to work. All I need to know is how a man can earn some credits around here.
And it's a nicely told story. The characters feel quite human and relatable, which is pretty rare for a sci-fi game. For example, I liked how Jim and his wife sent each other little video messages, and both of them seem to be kind of losing their minds a bit spending so much time apart.
Today, I spent the better part of 20 minutes looking for a hat that I was wearing. This week, I found my keys in the door, on the outside, of course, my slippers in the shower, and my toothbrush in the refrigerator.
I'm glad they're developing this side of the game a bit more, and there's some nice personal touches too. Like how he's got a photo of her permanently taped up in the cockpit of his mech, or how she sends you a bunch of music for you to listen to while you wander around in your rig.
Oh, hey, I thought you might need some music up there to keep you sane, keep you thinking of home, so there's a playlist for me attached to this message.
Ah, the ancient art of the mixtape.
And it's a good thing to have it too, because you spend a lot of time wandering around in this almost open world. You have a main base of operations, and from there you can jump into your rig and head out into the cold, harsh environment. The rig isn't really designed for combat, so mostly you use it just to get around.
I found some of the early missions a little bit tedious. Though in saying that, I think that might have been the point, since they give you the vibe of actually being an ordinary guy on a job rather than some alien-slaying space marine.
And you're also working for the Nevet Corporation, which fans of the series will remember from the first game as being the tyrannical villains. So it does get more interesting once the story progresses and the conspiracies unfold.
You didn't come here to ask questions. But believe me, James, this place has secrets.
Yeah, and while the world is fairly open hub, there's only one main story mission to follow at a time. And most areas you're not supposed to go are shut off, so you don't get too far off track. But there are plenty of side quests and optional missions that give you a good sense of freedom.
And you're usually free to jump out of your rig at any time and go exploring. You'll often find specialised components or some extra T-energy off the beaten track, which you can spend on upgrading your rig and buying new gear.
Good. That upgrade's a must. That ought to tone down your recoil quite a bit.
T-energy is also currency now, so there's no more of that constantly freezing to death like in the first game.
Yeah, and it's a much closer over-the-shoulder third-person perspective than in previous games, which I think many people will like. Plus, when you're on foot, it's almost got a Dead Space kind of horror vibe to it. Although you do have a fairly generous amount of regenerating health, so it's not as scary.
Yeah, it's a little easy, isn't it? Also, I got a bit sick of killing these little guys. Small swarming enemies are the bane of my video game existence, Hex. And it might feel like a weird thing to criticize, but small, fast-moving enemies can get a bit annoying, and there's just so many of them.
Yeah, the planet's littered with those pesky acrid things, as well as a few familiar foes from previous games. There are, of course, the huge bosses as well. Fighting them on foot was exciting when you get the chance, but fighting them in the rig is a bit disappointing. I mean, those fights are essentially a series of quick-time events, and in one boss fight you can't even move.
Yeah, it would have been nice if the rig versus monster combat was a bit more involved rather than just block, grab, drill, repeat. But it is strangely satisfying using a big drill on giant aliens. I liked the look of the world too. They nailed that gritty sci-fi feel, and I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this campaign.
Yeah, I think the focus on story really served this game much better than that grindy co-op of Lost Planet 2.
Although it can be done well both ways, as we saw with Dead Space 3 earlier this year. We did have limited access to the multiplayer. We reviewed this pre-release, so we weren't able to find a lot of games, but we did try out the 3 versus 3 wave mode. 2 teams fight off a few ways of acrid cooperatively, and then eventually end up in a final fight against each other for some territory. It's an interesting spin on a wave mode, and the matches I played were pretty fun. And I do love any game that lets me grapple around the place. Although there was only one type of acrid that ever showed up, which seemed like a missed opportunity. It would have been nice to see some of the bigger enemies make an appearance. But maybe we just aren't deep enough into it yet.
Yeah, but there seem to be quite a few unlocks and a fairly big progression sphere to work your way through, so it could be a fairly decent multiplayer offering. What are your final thoughts?
Well, I think there's a lot to like here. I think it's a step up from the last game, and I'm just happy to be playing Nicolas Cage, so I'm giving it 7.5 out of 10 rubber chickens.
It's a 7 from me. Bearded Nicolas Cage should be in more games.
He should be more games.
Let me help. Let me talk to my boss, Braddock.
Silence!